The stagecoach rattled back into San Antonio, Texas on a sweltering August afternoon in 1876, and Hannah Hayes sat inside with tears streaming down her face, knowing she had failed again. The driver had barely pulled the horses to a stop before Mrs. Pemberton, the agency matron who arranged mail-order bride matches, yanked open the door with a look of profound disappointment etched across her severe features. This was the third time in 8 months that Hannah had been returned by a prospective husband, and each rejection cut deeper than the last. "He said you cried too much," Mrs. Pemberton announced flatly, her voice carrying across the dusty street where curious onlookers had gathered. "That makes 3 now, Miss Hayes. 3 good men who were willing to take you as a wife, and you could not hold your tears long enough to make it through even a month with any of them." Hannah climbed down from the stagecoach, her brown dress dusty from the long journey, her auburn hair coming loose from its pins. She was 22 years old and had been orphaned when cholera swept through her hometown 2 years prior. The matchmaking agency had seemed like her only option, but apparently she was too broken for anyone to want permanently. Her green eyes were red-rimmed, and she clutched a small carpet bag that contained everything she owned in the world. "I am sorry," Hannah whispered, though she knew the apology meant nothing. She had apologized to all 3 men too, had tried to explain that the tears came unbidden, that grief did not follow a schedule or obey commands. But none of them had wanted a weeping wife, and she could not blame them. Mrs. Pemberton sighed heavily. "I cannot send you out again, Miss Hayes. I have a reputation to maintain. These men pay good money for brides, and I cannot keep sending them someone who will flood their homes with tears before the month is out. What am I to do?" Hannah asked, the panic rising in her chest. Without the agency, she had no means of support, no family to return to, no prospects whatsoever. "That is your concern now, not mine," Mrs. Pemberton said, though there was a hint of regret in her voice. She was not a cruel woman, merely practical. "I will give you enough for 3 nights at the boarding house. After that, you will need to find your own way." Hannah took the coins Mrs. Pemberton pressed into her palm and walked away from the agency office for the last time. The boarding house was clean but sparse, and she spent the first night lying on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling and wondering if there was any place in the world for a woman who could not stop crying. The next morning, she went looking for work. She tried the general store first, but the owner took one look at her red eyes and shook his head. She tried the hotel, the restaurant, even the laundry, but everywhere she went, people seemed to sense her fragility. No one wanted to hire someone who might dissolve into tears at any moment. By the 3rd day, Hannah's money was nearly gone, and desperation had begun to claw at her throat. She was sitting on a bench outside the church, trying to gather the courage to beg the reverend for help, when she heard the commotion down the street. A group of men had gathered near the livery stable, their voices raised in excitement. Hannah wiped her eyes and walked closer, curious despite her misery. "Nathan Lawson is back," she heard someone say. "Rode in this morning with a string of wild horses he caught up north." "That man has a gift with animals," another voice replied. "Can gentle the meanest bronco you ever saw." Hannah did not know who Nathan Lawson was, but something about the energy of the crowd drew her forward. She found herself standing at the edge of the corral behind the livery, watching as a tall man worked with a buckskin mare that was clearly terrified. The horse's eyes showed white, and she danced nervously at the end of a long rope, but the man moved with a patience that was almost hypnotic. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a weathered face that spoke of long hours in the sun. He wore dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat, and he spoke to the mare in a low, steady voice that Hannah could not quite make out. What struck her most was his gentleness. Every movement was calculated to soothe rather than frighten, and gradually, incredibly, the mare began to calm. Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes again, but this time they were different. There was something beautiful about watching this man work, something that reminded her that gentleness still existed in a world that often felt too harsh to bear. "You all right, miss?" Hannah jumped slightly and turned to find an older man standing beside her. He had kind eyes and a graying beard, and he was looking at her with concern. "Yes, I am fine," Hannah said automatically, though it was obviously a lie given the tears on her cheeks. "You do not look fine," the man said gently. "Name is Bill Tucker. I help Nathan with the horses sometimes." "You look like you could use a friend." Something about his straightforward kindness broke through Hannah's defenses. "I am Hannah Hayes, and I am not all right at all. I have nowhere to go and no prospects, and I cannot seem to stop crying long enough to convince anyone to hire me." Bill studied her for a long moment. "Well, Miss Hayes, crying is not the worst thing a person can do. Sometimes tears are the only honest response to a hard world." He paused, then added, "Nathan could use some help with the horses. He has taken on more than he can handle alone." "You good with animals?" "I grew up on a small farm," Hannah said. "Before my parents died, I can work hard and I learn quickly." "Come back tomorrow morning," Bill said. "Early. We will see what Nathan thinks." Hannah arrived at the livery stable just after dawn the next day, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. She found Nathan already working, mucking out stalls with efficient, economical movements. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a deep blue-gray, and there were lines at the corners that suggested he smiled often, though his expression was serious now. "Mr. Lawson," she said hesitantly, "my name is Hannah Hayes. Bill Tucker said you might need help with the horses." Nathan straightened and studied her with those penetrating eyes. Hannah felt her cheeks grow warm under his scrutiny, and to her horror, she felt tears beginning to well up again. She blinked furiously, trying to hold them back. "Bill mentioned you," Nathan said. His voice was deep and calm like his movements with the horses. "Said you needed work." "I do," Hannah said. "I can work hard and I know my way around animals. I will not cause any trouble." Even as she spoke, a tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly, mortified. Nathan was going to refuse her just like everyone else had. But instead of dismissing her, Nathan tilted his head slightly, still watching her. "You crying because you are scared I will say no, or is there something else?" The directness of the question caught Hannah off guard. "Both, I suppose." "And 100 other things. My parents died 2 years ago, and I have been sent back by 3 different men who thought they wanted to marry me, and I have nowhere to go and no one who wants me, and I cannot seem to stop these tears no matter how hard I try." The words came out in a rush, and more tears followed. Hannah wanted to disappear into the ground. This was exactly why no one would help her. Who wanted to employ someone who fell apart at the slightest provocation? Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down the pitchfork he had been holding and walked closer. "Miss Hayes, look at me." Hannah raised her eyes to his, embarrassed and defeated. "Tears mean you are still fighting," Nathan said quietly. "If you had given up, you would be empty, dry. But you are still feeling things, still hurting, and that means part of you has not quit yet. So wipe your eyes and let us see if you can handle a pitchfork." Something in Hannah's chest loosened at his words. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Everyone else had treated her tears as weakness, as failure. But Nathan Lawson looked at her as though her grief was simply a fact, neither good nor bad, just something she carried. "Thank you," she whispered, and meant it more deeply than she could express. "Do not thank me yet," Nathan said, but there was a hint of warmth in his voice. "You have not seen how much work there is to do." He was not exaggerating. Over the next several hours, Hannah discovered that caring for a string of wild horses was back-breaking labor. There were stalls to muck, water troughs to fill, feed to distribute, and a dozen other tasks that left her arms aching and her back sore. But Nathan worked alongside her, and his steady presence was oddly comforting. He did not talk much, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and kind. By midday, Hannah was exhausted but felt better than she had in months. There was something satisfying about physical labor, about being useful. Nathan heated coffee over a small fire outside the stable, and they sat on a weathered bench to drink it. "You did good work this morning," Nathan said. "If you want the job, it is yours. I cannot pay much, but there is a small room above the stable where you could stay. It is not fancy, but it is clean and dry." "I want it," Hannah said immediately. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. You have no idea what this means to me." "Call me Nathan," he said. "And you are welcome, Hannah." When he said her name, something warm bloomed in Hannah's chest, a feeling she had not experienced in a very long time. Over the following weeks, Hannah settled into a rhythm at the stable. She woke before dawn each day and worked until dusk, learning the particular needs and temperaments of each horse. Nathan was a patient teacher, showing her how to approach the more skittish animals, how to read their body language, how to gentle them without breaking their spirits. "The key is not to dominate them," Nathan explained one afternoon as they worked with a particularly nervous gelding. "It is about earning their trust. You have to show them that you are not a threat, that you understand their fear." Hannah watched as he moved slowly around the horse, speaking in that low, soothing voice. There was something almost meditative about the way Nathan worked, and she found herself studying him as much as she studied the horses. He was a man of few words, but everything he did was deliberate and meaningful. He never raised his voice, never lost his patience, and never treated any creature, human or animal, with anything less than respect. She did still cry, of course. Some days the grief would wash over her without warning, and she would find herself weeping as she brushed down one of the horses. But Nathan never scolded her or made her feel ashamed. Sometimes he would simply continue working in companionable silence. Other times he would say something like, "That buckskin mare there, she cries too, in her own way. Lost her foal last spring, but she keeps going." Those small observations helped Hannah understand that her sorrow was not unique, that loss was woven into the fabric of life itself. It did not make the pain disappear, but it made it more bearable somehow. Bill Tucker became a regular presence at the stable as well. He was full of stories about Nathan, about how he had grown up on a ranch further north, but had struck out on his own 5 years ago to make his way as a horse trader and breaker. "Best I have ever seen with animals," Bill said proudly. "Has a way about him that is just natural." "Does he have family?" Hannah asked one day, curiosity getting the better of her. "His parents are still alive, run that ranch up north," Bill said. "But Nathan wanted to build something of his own. He is the kind of man who needs to prove himself, not to anyone else but to himself." Hannah thought she understood that impulse. She, too, was trying to prove that she could survive, that she was more than just a woman who cried too much. One evening in late September, after they had finished the day's work, Nathan surprised her by asking if she would like to ride out to see the sunset. "There is a good spot about a mile from here," he said. "Hills overlook the valley. It is worth seeing." Hannah agreed, her heart beating a little faster. They saddled 2 of the gentler horses and rode out as the sky began to turn gold. The landscape around San Antonio was beautiful in its own stark way, all rolling hills and scattered oak trees. When they reached the overlook Nathan had mentioned, Hannah drew in her breath. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and the light seemed to set the whole world on fire. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "Thought you might like it," Nathan said. He sat on his horse beside her, and for a long moment they simply watched the sun sink toward the horizon. "Nathan," Hannah said, "why did you give me a chance when no one else would?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I suppose because I know what it is like to be judged for something you cannot control. When I was younger, I was not good with people. Too quiet, too serious. Folks thought there was something wrong with me, but I understood animals and they understood me. I figured if I could see worth in a half-wild horse that everyone else had given up on, I ought to extend that same courtesy to people." "I am glad you did," Hannah said. "You have been kinder to me than anyone has in a very long time." Nathan looked at her then, really looked at her, and Hannah felt something shift between them. It was subtle but unmistakable, like the first breath of wind before a storm. "You are stronger than you think, Hannah," Nathan said quietly. "Anyone who can keep going through what you have been through has more courage than most." His words settled into Hannah's heart and took root there. She realized that somewhere along the way she had begun to heal. The tears still came, but less frequently now, and they no longer felt like failures. They were simply part of her, like her green eyes or auburn hair. As autumn deepened, Hannah and Nathan fell into an easy partnership. They worked side by side each day, and their conversations grew longer and more personal. Nathan told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride almost before he could walk, about the satisfaction he felt when a frightened horse finally learned to trust him. Hannah told him about her childhood, about her parents and the small farm they had loved, about the terrible emptiness that had consumed her after their deaths. "I felt like I was drowning," she admitted one crisp October morning as they repaired a section of fence. "Like the grief was a river and I could not find the surface." "And now?" Nathan asked. "Now it feels more like a lake," Hannah said slowly, working out the metaphor. "Still there, still deep, but calmer. I can float in it instead of fighting it." "That is good," Nathan said. "Fighting yourself never works. Better to make peace with what you carry." There was wisdom in Nathan's words, a kind of hard-won understanding that came from his own struggles. Hannah found herself watching him more often, noticing the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the strength in his hands, the gentleness in his eyes when he looked at her. She was falling for him, she realized with a start. Slowly, carefully, like a wild horse learning to trust. The realization frightened her. After 3 failed attempts at marriage, she was terrified of opening her heart again. What if Nathan did not feel the same way? What if he saw her only as an employee, someone to help with the horses? What if her tears eventually drove him away too? But as the weeks passed, Hannah began to notice signs that suggested Nathan's feelings might mirror her own. The way he always made sure she had eaten. The way he smiled more often when she was around. The way his hand would sometimes brush against hers, lingering just a moment longer than necessary. One cool November evening, after they had settled the horses for the night, Nathan invited Hannah to share supper with him. He had a small cabin on the property, just 2 rooms but well kept, and he had cooked a simple meal of beans and cornbread. They ate by lamplight, and the domestic intimacy of the scene made Hannah's heart ache with longing. "Hannah," Nathan said after they had finished eating, "I need to tell you something." Her stomach tightened with anxiety. "All right." "When Bill first suggested I hire you, I almost said no," Nathan admitted. "Not because I did not think you could do the work, but because I was not sure I could handle having someone else around all the time. I have gotten used to being alone, to having things quiet and predictable." Hannah's heart sank. This sounded like the beginning of a dismissal. But Nathan continued, "Then I met you, and I saw someone who was hurting but still trying. Someone who was scared but brave anyway. And over these past months, having you here has been the best thing that has happened to me in years. You have made this place feel less like just a stable and more like a home." Hope began to bloom in Hannah's chest. "Nathan, I feel the same way. You gave me a reason to keep going when I thought I had none. You made me believe that my tears did not make me broken." "They do not," Nathan said firmly. He reached across the table and took her hand in his. His palm was rough and warm, and Hannah felt a thrill run through her at the contact. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Hannah Hayes, and if I am being honest, I have fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes, but these were different. These were tears of joy, of relief, of hope. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been so afraid to say it, afraid you would not want me." Nathan stood and came around the table, pulling her gently to her feet. "I want you," he said softly. "Not despite your tears, but all of you, everything you are." When he kissed her, it was gentle and searching, a question and an answer all at once. Hannah melted into him, feeling safer and more cherished than she had ever felt in her life. This was what she had been searching for through all those failed matches, this deep connection, this sense of being truly seen and accepted. They stood there in the lamplight for a long time, holding each other, and Hannah felt the last pieces of her broken heart begin to knit back together. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. They spent their days working with the horses and their evenings talking, planning, dreaming. Nathan was not a man of grand gestures or flowery words, but his love showed in 1,000 small ways. The way he saved her the best pieces of food. The way he always checked to make sure she was warm enough. The way he looked at her as though she was the most precious thing in his world. In early December, Nathan asked Hannah to marry him. There was no elaborate proposal, no ring yet. They were sitting on the bench outside the stable, watching the stars come out, and he simply turned to her and said, "Hannah, I would be honored if you would be my wife." "Yes," Hannah said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married on a clear January morning in 1877 in the small church in San Antonio. Bill Tucker stood up as Nathan's witness, and the Reverend's wife stood with Hannah. It was a simple ceremony, but it was everything Hannah had ever wanted. When Nathan slipped a plain gold band onto her finger and promised to love her for the rest of his life, she cried. But this time, her tears were celebrated rather than condemned. "I told you tears meant you were still fighting," Nathan whispered as he wiped them away with his thumb. "And you won, Hannah. We both won." Married life suited them both. Hannah moved into Nathan's cabin, and together they turned it into a true home. She hung curtains in the windows and planted a small garden. Nathan built her a bookshelf and surprised her with books whenever he went into town. They worked side by side each day, and at night they talked and laughed and held each other close. The stable business grew steadily. Word spread about Nathan's skill with difficult horses, and ranchers from all over Texas began bringing him their most challenging animals. Hannah proved to have her own gift with horses, particularly the younger ones. She had a patience and intuition that complemented Nathan's methods perfectly, and together they made an excellent team. In the spring of 1877, Nathan made a decision that would change their lives. "I want to buy land," he told Hannah one evening. "Build our own ranch. We could breed horses instead of just breaking them, build something lasting." "Where?" Hannah asked, excited by the possibility. "There is land available near Riverside, California," Nathan said. "Good grazing, plenty of water. It would be a fresh start for both of us." Hannah thought of Texas, of the matchmaking agency and all her failures here. Then she thought of starting over somewhere new, of building a life with Nathan where no one knew about her past. "Let us do it," she said. They spent the next several months preparing for the move, selling off most of the horses but keeping their best breeding stock. In August, they loaded up 2 wagons with their belongings and began the long journey west. Bill Tucker came to see them off, and there were tears in his eyes when he hugged them both. "You take care of each other," he said. "And remember, Nathan, what I always told you, the best things in life are worth waiting for." The journey to California took 6 weeks and tested them in ways they had not anticipated. The trail was rough, the weather unpredictable, and there were days when progress seemed impossible. But Nathan and Hannah faced each challenge together, and their bond only grew stronger. They learned to read each other's moods, to support each other through the hard moments, to celebrate the small victories. When they finally reached Riverside in late September, Hannah fell in love with the land immediately. It was green and lush compared to Texas, with mountains in the distance and a river that ran clear and cold. Nathan found a good piece of land for sale, 200 acres with a creek running through it and plenty of grass for horses. They used their savings to buy the property and spent the autumn building a house. It was hard work, but neighbors came to help, and by the time winter arrived, they had a solid 4-room cabin with a stone fireplace and glass windows. The stable came next, large enough for 20 horses, with a corral and a small paddock for training. Their first winter in California was mild compared to what they had known in Texas, and they spent the time planning and preparing. In the spring of 1878, they bought several mares from a rancher in the valley and bred them to the stallion they had brought from Texas. It was the beginning of the Lawson Ranch, and both Nathan and Hannah poured their hearts into making it succeed. Life settled into a satisfying rhythm. They woke early each morning and worked until dusk, tending the horses, repairing fences, planting crops for feed. Hannah's garden flourished in the California soil, and she learned to preserve food for the winter months. Nathan's reputation spread quickly, and soon they had more business than they could handle. But it was not just about the work. Nathan and Hannah made time for each other, for long rides through the hills, for quiet evenings on their porch, for stolen moments of laughter and tenderness. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their thoughts and dreams and fears. Nathan told Hannah things he had never told anyone, about his childhood insecurities, about his need to prove his worth. Hannah shared her lingering grief for her parents, but also her joy in the new life they were building. "You ever regret it?" Hannah asked one summer evening in 1879 as they sat watching the sunset from their porch. "Leaving Texas, taking a chance on me." Nathan pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Hannah Lawson. You taught me that strength comes in many forms and that love is worth every risk." In the fall of 1879, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a touch of anxiety. They had talked about children, had hoped for them, but the reality was both exciting and terrifying. Nathan became even more protective, insisting that Hannah rest more and not push herself too hard with the horses. "I am pregnant, not fragile," Hannah reminded him with gentle exasperation. "I can still work." "I know," Nathan said, "but let me take care of you anyway." Hannah allowed herself to be cared for, and she found that pregnancy suited her. Her body changed in ways that amazed them both, and Nathan was attentive and loving throughout. He talked to her belly, telling their unborn child about the horses and the ranch and all the adventures they would have together. In May of 1880, Hannah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel William Lawson, after Nathan's grandfather and their friend Bill Tucker. Samuel had Nathan's dark hair and Hannah's green eyes, and from the moment he was born, he captured both their hearts completely. Parenthood brought new joys and new challenges. Samuel was a demanding infant, colicky and fussy, and there were many sleepless nights. But Nathan proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Samuel when Hannah was exhausted, changing diapers without complaint, marveling at every small milestone. "He has your stubbornness," Nathan said one night after finally getting Samuel to sleep. "And your determination," Hannah replied with a tired smile. As Samuel grew, the ranch continued to thrive. Nathan and Hannah hired a young man named Peter to help with the work, giving them more time to focus on the breeding program and on raising their son. Samuel took his first steps in the stable, surrounded by horses, and it was clear from an early age that he had inherited his father's gift with animals. In the spring of 1882, Hannah became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in November she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Margaret. Rose was a peaceful baby, sweet-tempered and easy, and she brought a different kind of energy to their family. Samuel adored his little sister, and watching the two of them together filled Hannah with a contentment she had never imagined possible. The years flowed by in a steady stream of seasons and small miracles. The ranch grew and prospered, becoming known throughout California for the quality of its horses. Nathan's methods were studied and copied by other breeders, and Hannah's intuitive understanding of horse behavior became legendary in its own right. They trained young horses for ranchers and wealthy buyers, and every animal that left their ranch was healthy, well-adjusted, and responsive. But more than the success of the business, it was the life they had built together that mattered most. Their children grew strong and happy, learning the value of hard work and the importance of kindness. Samuel became a skilled rider by the age of 6, and Rose showed an early talent for gentling even the most nervous foals. The family worked together, ate together, laughed together. Hannah still cried sometimes. When she thought of her parents, when she was overwhelmed by how much she loved her family, when the world felt too beautiful to bear. But the tears no longer frightened her or made her feel weak. They were simply part of who she was, an expression of a heart that felt deeply and loved completely. Nathan never stopped reminding her of what he had said that first day in the stable. "Tears mean you are still fighting," he would say, pulling her into his arms. "And you fought your way to this life, Hannah. You earned every bit of happiness we have." In 1885, when Samuel was 5 and Rose was 3, they decided to expand the house. Nathan built 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen, giving them space to grow. He also built Hannah a proper office where she could manage the books and correspondence for the ranch. The business side of things had grown complex, and Hannah had a head for numbers that Nathan lacked. That summer, Bill Tucker came to visit. He was older now, his beard completely gray, but his eyes were still kind and his laugh still booming. He stayed for 2 weeks, delighting the children with stories and helping Nathan break in a particularly challenging stallion. "You two did well," Bill said on his last evening, sitting on the porch with Nathan and Hannah while the children slept inside. "Built something real here, something that will last. We could not have done it without you," Hannah said. "You gave us our start, Bill. You believed in us." "I just pointed Nathan in the right direction," Bill said. "The 2 of you did the rest. And those grandchildren I am not actually related to but claim anyway are pretty spectacular." They all laughed, and Hannah felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Her life had taken so many turns, had brought her through so much pain, but it had led her here. To this porch, this man, these children. to a home built on love and trust and the courage to keep fighting even when everything seemed lost. The 1880s brought both challenges and triumphs. There were droughts that tested their resources, and winters that were harder than expected. There was the year that sickness swept through the area, and they nearly lost Rose to pneumonia. There were financial pressures and moments of doubt. But through it all, Nathan and Hannah faced everything together. They had learned that love was not just a feeling but a choice, a commitment renewed every day. They chose each other in the mundane moments of daily life, in the exhaustion of parenting young children, in the stress of running a business, in the quiet intimacy of shared dreams. In 1887, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again at age 33. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and she spent much of it tired and uncomfortable. But in March of 1888, she gave birth to twin boys. They named them Daniel Nathan and James Robert, and suddenly their family of 4 had become 6. The twins were a handful, energetic and mischievous in ways that Samuel and Rose had never been. Nathan hired additional help for the ranch so they could manage the chaos, and the house was always full of noise and laughter, and the particular brand of disorder that came with raising 4 children. Samuel, now 8 years old, became a tremendous help with his younger siblings. He was patient and responsible beyond his years, already showing signs of the man he would become. Rose, at 6, was the peacemaker, always knowing just how to soothe a crying baby or mediate a squabble between the twins. "We have our own small army now," Nathan said one evening after finally getting all 4 children to bed. "And we could not be more blessed," Hannah replied, leaning against him on the porch swing they had installed years ago. The 1890s arrived with a sense of optimism and progress. California was growing rapidly, and with it came new opportunities. The railroad had made travel easier, and buyers from as far away as New York were coming to purchase horses from the Lawson Ranch. Nathan and Hannah found themselves at the center of a thriving business, and they took pride in every horse they trained and sold. But they never lost sight of what mattered most. Family dinners around their large table were sacred, a time when the day's work was set aside and they simply enjoyed being together. Nathan told stories about the horses, and the children chattered about their days. Hannah watched them all, her heart so full it sometimes hurt. "You remember when we met?" Nathan asked one night after the children had gone to bed. They were sitting in front of the fireplace, Hannah curled against his side. "Every detail," Hannah said. "I was so scared that day. So certain you would reject me like everyone else had." "And I almost did," Nathan admitted. "I was scared too, scared of letting someone in, scared of failing you." "You never failed me," Hannah said firmly. "Not once, Nathan, you saved me." "We saved each other," Nathan corrected. He kissed her forehead, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance. By 1895, Samuel was 15 and already as tall as his father. He worked the ranch full-time now, his skill with horses rivaling Nathan's. Rose, at 13, was becoming a young woman, beautiful and kind, with her mother's compassion and her father's steady strength. The twins were 7, still wild and energetic but showing early promise as horsemen. Nathan and Hannah had reached their 40s, and while their bodies bore the marks of years of hard work, their love had only deepened. They knew each other so well now that words were often unnecessary. A glance across the dinner table could communicate volumes. A touch in passing could convey everything that needed saying. One afternoon in the spring of 1896, Hannah was working in the stable when she overheard 2 women talking. They had come to look at horses for their husbands, and they did not realize Hannah was nearby. "That is Hannah Lawson," one of them said. I heard she was returned by 3 different husbands before Nathan married her. Can you imagine? What must have been wrong with her? Must not have been much wrong, the other woman replied. Look at what she and Nathan have built together. And their children are lovely. Still 3 returns, the first woman said. That is humiliating. Hannah felt the old shame start to rise. But then she looked around at the stable she and Nathan had built, at the thriving ranch visible through the open doors, at her wedding ring glinting in the afternoon light. Those 3 men who had returned her had done her the greatest favor of her life. They had freed her to find Nathan, to build this beautiful existence. She stepped out where the women could see her, and they had the grace to look embarrassed. You are right, Hannah said calmly. I was returned 3 times. Those men wanted wives who did not cry, who did not feel things too deeply. But my husband, he understood that tears are not weakness. He saw strength where others saw failure. And I am grateful every single day that those other men sent me back, because it meant I was free to find the person who actually deserved my love. The women stammered apologies, but Hannah just smiled and went back to work. She had nothing to prove to anyone. Her life spoke for itself. That evening she told Nathan about the encounter. He listened quietly, then took her hand. Those men were fools, he said, and I am the luckiest man alive because of their foolishness. We are both lucky, Hannah said. We found each other despite everything that could have kept us apart. As the century drew to a close, the Lawson Ranch was more successful than ever. Samuel had proven himself a skilled businessman as well as a horseman, and he had ideas for expanding their breeding program. Rose was training horses with a gentle touch that reminded everyone of her mother. The twins, at 12, were finally starting to settle down and show real focus in their work. Nathan and Hannah were able to step back a little, trusting their children to carry on the work they had started. They took more time for themselves, for long rides into the hills, for quiet afternoons reading on the porch, for simply being together. In the summer of 1899, on their 22nd wedding anniversary, Nathan took Hannah to the same overlook where he had first brought her all those years ago in Texas. They had found a similar spot near Riverside, a hill that overlooked their ranch and the valley beyond. 22 years, Nathan said, his arm around Hannah's waist. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. I know what you mean, Hannah said. I can barely remember what my life was like before you. It was harder, Nathan said. For both of us. But we found each other and we built something incredible. They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Hannah felt tears slip down her cheeks. Happy tears, grateful tears, tears of a heart that was full to overflowing. Still crying, Nathan said gently, wiping them away with his familiar touch. Still fighting, Hannah replied with a smile. Still winning, Nathan said, and kissed her as the last light faded from the sky. The new century arrived with celebration and hope. The year 1900 felt momentous, a turning point in history. Samuel was now 20, a man in his own right, and he had started courting a young woman from town named Elizabeth. Rose at 18 had suitors lining up, though she seemed in no hurry to choose among them. The twins were 15 and already talking about their futures with the ranch. Nathan and Hannah, now both in their mid-40s, found themselves entering a new phase of life. They were no longer the young couple struggling to build a dream but established ranchers with a reputation that stretched across the West. They had enough money to be comfortable, enough help that the work was manageable, enough love to fill a lifetime. One evening in the spring of 1901, the entire family gathered for Sunday dinner. Samuel had brought Elizabeth, who fit perfectly into their boisterous family dynamic. The conversation flowed freely, punctuated by laughter and good-natured teasing. Hannah looked around the table at the faces she loved most in the world and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. After dinner, when the children had scattered to their various pursuits, Nathan and Hannah walked down to the creek that ran through their property. The evening was warm and peaceful, and they sat on a fallen log that had become their favorite spot over the years. "Samuel is going to ask Elizabeth to marry him," Nathan said. "I know," Hannah replied. "She will say yes, and they will be very happy." "Like we have been," Nathan said. "Yes, like we have been," Hannah agreed. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, marveling as always that this man had chosen her, had seen worth in her when she could not see it herself. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if one of those first 3 men had worked out?" Nathan asked. Hannah thought about it seriously. "Sometimes, but I cannot imagine it would have been even a fraction as good as this. Those men wanted someone convenient, someone easy. They did not want me, not really, but you, Nathan, you wanted all of me. The tears and the pain and the joy and the strength. You never asked me to be less than I was." "Because you were already perfect," Nathan said simply. "No," Hannah said with a slight laugh. "I was broken. But you helped me heal, and I like to think I helped you too." "You did," Nathan said. "You taught me that it was okay to let someone in, to trust another person with my heart. You made me better, Hannah." They sat there as darkness fell, listening to the creek burble over stones, watching fireflies begin to dance in the grass. These were the moments Hannah treasured most, the quiet intimacy of a love that had weathered storms and grown stronger for it. Samuel and Elizabeth were married in the fall of 1901, a joyous celebration that brought together friends and family from all over California. The young couple moved into a small house on the ranch property, and Samuel took on even more responsibility for the daily operations. Nathan was proud of his son, proud of the man he had become, and grateful that the ranch they had built would continue into the next generation. In 1902, Rose announced her engagement to a kind young veterinarian named Thomas, who had been treating their horses for the past year. The wedding was planned for the following spring, and Hannah threw herself into preparations with enthusiasm. Her little girl was becoming a woman, starting her own life, and while there was sadness in letting go, there was also tremendous pride. The twins, now 17, had developed into skilled horsemen with personalities that complemented each other perfectly. Daniel was the dreamer, always coming up with new ideas and innovations, while James was the practical one who figured out how to make those dreams reality. Together, they talked about expanding the ranch even further, about breeding not just working horses, but show horses for the growing number of wealthy enthusiasts. Nathan and Hannah listened to their son's ambitions with amusement and approval. "They remind me of us," Hannah said one night. "Young and full of dreams. Except they have a solid foundation to build on," Nathan replied. "We had to start from nothing." "Which made the building all the sweeter," Hannah said. In the spring of 1903, Rose married Thomas in a ceremony even more beautiful than Samuel's had been. Hannah cried throughout, tears of joy and nostalgia and hope for her daughter's future. Nathan stood beside her, his hand in hers, and whispered, "She will be happy. She chose well." "Like her mother did," Hannah whispered back. That summer brought the arrival of their first grandchild, when Elizabeth gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Clara. Nathan and Hannah were besotted with their granddaughter, marveling at her tiny fingers and bright eyes. Holding Clara, Hannah was transported back to when her own children had been infants, to those exhausting, magical early days of parenthood. "We are old enough to be grandparents," Nathan said with mock horror. "Speak for yourself," Hannah replied with a laugh. I feel exactly as young as I did at 22. Liar, Nathan said affectionately, but you are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. Life continued its forward march. Rose and Thomas bought a small property adjacent to the ranch, and Rose continued to work with the horses even as she started her own family. The twins took over more and more of the daily operations, allowing Nathan and Hannah to truly step back and enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. By 1905, Hannah was 51 and Nathan was 55. They had slowed down considerably from their younger years, but they were healthy and active, still riding most days, still involved in the ranch's decisions. They had 3 grandchildren now, with more surely on the way, and their home was often filled with the sounds of children playing. One evening in late summer, Hannah and Nathan took a ride up to their favorite overlook. They did this less frequently now, their bodies not quite as resilient as they once were, but the view was still worth the effort. They sat together on a blanket, watching the sun set over the land they had claimed and cultivated. I have been thinking about what I want to do with the rest of my life, Nathan said. Hannah looked at him with curiosity. And what is that? Exactly what I am doing now, Nathan said. Spending time with you, watching our grandchildren grow. Working with horses when I feel like it and resting when I do not. I do not need grand adventures, Hannah. I just need this. That sounds perfect to me, Hannah said, intertwining her fingers with his. You have any regrets? Nathan asked. Anything you wish had been different? Hannah considered the question seriously. Her life had not been easy. She had lost her parents, had been rejected and hurt, had struggled and cried and fought for every bit of happiness she had found. But all of that had led her here, to this man, to this family, to this beautiful life. Not a single one, she said finally. Every painful moment brought me closer to you, and that makes it all worthwhile. Nathan pulled her close, and they sat there as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Hannah felt tears slide down her cheeks, as they still did sometimes, but she was not ashamed. These tears were a testament to a life fully lived, to a heart that had never stopped feeling, never stopped fighting. Still crying, Nathan observed, his voice full of love. Still fighting, Hannah agreed. Still winning, Nathan said, and kissed her as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The years that followed were peaceful and full. Nathan and Hannah settled into the rhythm of grandparenthood, spoiling their grandchildren, and then sending them home to their parents. They traveled a little, taking a trip to San Francisco to see the rebuilding after the great earthquake and fire of 1906, visiting Bill Tucker one last time before his death in 1907. Samuel took over complete management of the ranch, running it with skill and innovation that made Nathan proud. Rose and Thomas had 4 children who were as comfortable around horses as their mother had been. The twins married within a year of each other, both choosing strong, capable women who fit seamlessly into the family. By 1910, Nathan and Hannah were in their 60s and officially retired. They spent their days quietly, reading, gardening, taking slow rides around the property. They watched their grandchildren with deep satisfaction, seeing their values and their love of the land passed down to another generation. On a warm evening in June of 1912, Hannah and Nathan celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and a few close friends. The party was loud and joyful, full of music and laughter and love. When it finally ended and they were alone on their porch, Hannah leaned against Nathan with a contented sigh. 35 years, she said. How did we get to be so old? One day at a time, Nathan replied. One choice at a time, and I would not change a single day of it. Neither would I, Hannah said. She looked up at him, at the face she had loved for more than 3 decades, now lined with age but still achingly dear to her. "You know what I was thinking about earlier?" "What is that?" "That day we met. When you told me that tears meant I was still fighting." "That was the moment my life changed, Nathan. That was when I started to believe I might be worth something after all." Nathan was quiet for a moment, his arms tightening around her. "You were always worth everything, Hannah. I just helped you see it." They sat there until the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded anything either of them had dared to dream. The decade passed gently. There were losses, as there always are in life. Samuel and Elizabeth's oldest daughter died of influenza in 1914, a tragedy that shook the entire family. Nathan's health began to fail in 1915, his heart growing weaker. But through it all, Nathan and Hannah held fast to each other, their love a constant in a changing world. In the spring of 1918, on a morning bright with promise, Nathan woke before dawn as he always had. He turned to look at Hannah sleeping beside him, her auburn hair now streaked with silver, her face peaceful in sleep. He studied her for a long moment, memorizing every detail, filled with gratitude for the life they had shared. Hannah woke to find him watching her. "Good morning," she said with a sleepy smile. "Good morning," Nathan replied. "I love you, Hannah Lawson. I have loved you from the moment you walked into that stable with tears on your cheeks, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Hannah said, her eyes filling with the tears that still came easily after all these years. "You gave me everything, Nathan. A home, a family, a life worth living. You taught me that I was enough exactly as I was." They lay there together as the sun rose, and Hannah would later remember it as perfect. One last perfect morning with the man who had been her anchor, her partner, her great love. Nathan died peacefully in his sleep 3 nights later, with Hannah holding his hand. He was 68 years old and had lived a full, rich life. The funeral was large, attended by people from all over California who had known and respected Nathan Lawson. But for Hannah, the loss was enormous, a hole torn in the fabric of her existence. In the days and weeks that followed, Hannah cried more than she had in years. But even in her grief, she understood what Nathan would have said. Tears meant she was still fighting, still feeling, still honoring the love they had shared. And so she allowed herself to grieve fully, trusting that the pain would eventually soften into something more bearable. Her children rallied around her, insisting she was not alone. Samuel and his family moved into the main house to be near her. Rose visited daily. The twins made sure she was eating and sleeping. The grandchildren, now ranging in age from 15 to infants, filled the house with life and noise and distraction. Slowly, Hannah began to heal. She started going down to the stable again, running her hands over the horses Nathan had loved, feeling close to him there. She tended her garden, walked the land they had claimed together, sat on the porch watching the sunsets that had always moved them both to wonder. One evening in the fall of 1918, Hannah's oldest grandchild, Clara, now 15, came to sit beside her on the porch. "Grandmother," Clara said, "will you tell me the story of how you and grandfather met?" Hannah smiled, the sadness in her heart easing slightly. "I would be happy to." She told Clara everything. About being returned 3 times, about her tears, about walking into that stable in San Antonio convinced she was unemployable, about Nathan looking at her and seeing strength instead of weakness, about the words that had changed her life. "Tears mean you are still fighting," Hannah said, repeating Nathan's words. "He helped me understand that my emotions were not a flaw but a gift. That feeling deeply was a kind of courage." Clara listened intently, her young face thoughtful. "I will remember that," she said. "When things are hard, I will remember that tears mean I am still fighting." "Good," Hannah said, squeezing her granddaughter's hand. "And know that you come from a long line of fighters. Your grandfather and I built this ranch from nothing. We faced every challenge together and we never gave up. That same strength is in you." As the years passed, Hannah settled into widowhood with grace. She remained active in the ranch operations, offering advice and wisdom earned through decades of experience. She was surrounded by family, by the legacy she and Nathan had created together. She wrote long letters to her children and grandchildren, passing down family stories and the lessons she and Nathan had learned. In the spring of 1925, at the age of 71, Hannah gathered her entire family together. There were dozens of them now, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the fruits of the love she and Nathan had shared. She looked around at all those faces and felt overwhelming gratitude. "I want you all to know," she said, her voice still strong, "that this family, this ranch, everything we have, it all started with a man who looked past my tears and saw my strength. Your grandfather, Nathan Lawson, was the finest person I ever knew, and every good thing in my life came from his love and faith in me." She paused, looking at each person in turn. "Life will be hard sometimes. You will face rejection and loss and pain. But remember that tears mean you are still fighting. Never be ashamed of feeling deeply. It is the people who still feel, who still care, who still love despite the cost, who change the world." There was not a dry eye in the room when she finished speaking. And Hannah looked at them all, at the beautiful family she and Nathan had created, and knew that their love would echo through generations. Hannah lived for another 7 years, passing away peacefully in her sleep in February of 1932 at the age of 78. She was buried next to Nathan on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a simple headstone that read, "Hannah Hayes Lawson. She fought. She loved. She won." The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management and eventually passed to his children and then to theirs. The horses bred on the Lawson Ranch became famous throughout the West, known for their intelligence, their temperament, their responsiveness. But more than that, the Lawson family became known for their values, for the way they treated people and animals with equal kindness, for the understanding that strength came in many forms. And through all the generations that followed, the story of Hannah and Nathan was passed down. The story of a woman who cried too much, and a cowboy who understood that tears meant you were still fighting. The story of love that transformed two broken people into something whole and beautiful. The story of a life built on hope, courage, and the belief that everyone deserves a second chance, or a third or a fourth, until they finally find where they belong. It became a family legend, told and retold, each generation finding new meaning in it. Young brides facing difficulties would remember Hannah's perseverance. Young men struggling to find their place would think of Nathan's patience. Children learning to ride would hear about the way their ancestors had built something from nothing, one day and one choice at a time. The ranch itself stood as a testament to what love could build. The original cabin that Nathan and Hannah had constructed in 1877 was preserved as part of a larger house, and family members would walk through it reverently, touching the walls that Nathan had built with his own hands, standing in the kitchen where Hannah had cooked thousands of meals, sitting by the fireplace where the two of them had spent countless evenings talking and dreaming. In the stable, there was a plaque installed by Samuel in 1935 that read, "In memory of Nathan and Hannah Lawson, who understood that the strongest bonds are forged through gentleness, patience, and love. May all who work with horses here remember their example." The legacy of Hannah and Nathan Lawson was not just a successful ranch or a large family. though those things were significant. Their true legacy was the understanding they passed down that people, like horses, need to be met where they are, accepted for who they are, and given the space to heal and grow. That tears are not weakness but evidence of a heart that refuses to go numb. That love is not about perfection, but about seeing someone clearly and choosing them anyway, every single day. Their story became a beacon for anyone who had ever felt broken or unwanted, a reminder that the right person will see your scars and call them beautiful, will witness your tears and recognize them as strength. It was a promise that there is always hope, always the possibility of transformation, always another chance to find where you truly belong. And so the story of the woman who cried too much and the cowboy who understood lived on, passed from grandparents to grandchildren, from old friends to new acquaintances, from one generation to the next. It lived in the bloodlines of the horses that still bore the Lawson name, in the land that still prospered under the care of their descendants, in the values that shaped how the family approached every challenge. Most of all, it lived in the hearts of anyone who heard it and recognized themselves in Hannah's struggle or Nathan's compassion. It lived in the understanding that we are all, in some way, fighting our own battles, and that the tears we shed are not signs of surrender but evidence that we have not given up, that we are still here, still feeling, still hoping for something better. Hannah Hayes had been returned 3 times, rejected for crying too much, before she met Nathan Lawson in that stable in San Antonio in 1876. But that rejection had been necessary, had cleared the path for her to find the one person who would understand that her tears were not a flaw but a feature, not a weakness but a kind of bravery. And Nathan, who had spent years working with frightened horses, who had learned that trust must be earned through patience and consistency, had recognized in Hannah a kindred spirit, someone who needed gentleness rather than harshness, acceptance rather than judgment, love rather than criticism. Together they had built a life that exceeded anything either of them had imagined possible. They had raised 4 children who grew into good, capable adults. They had created a successful ranch that provided for multiple generations. They had loved each other through joy and sorrow, through triumph and tragedy, through youth and age. But more than any of those achievements, they had proven something fundamental about human nature, that we all have value even when we cannot see it ourselves. That the right love, offered at the right time, can heal even the deepest wounds. That it is never too late to start over, to try again, to believe that happiness is possible. The sun set over the Lawson Ranch in Riverside, California, as it had for decades, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The horses grazed peacefully in the pastures Nathan had fenced and Hannah had tended. The house stood solid and welcoming, filled with the laughter of another generation. The creek burbled over stones worn smooth by time, and somewhere in the stable, someone was working with a nervous young horse, speaking in low, patient tones, building trust one moment at a time. And if you listened carefully, you might hear an echo of words spoken long ago in a different stable in a different state, words that had changed one woman's life and rippled out to touch countless others. Tears mean you are still fighting. Those words lived on, a gift from a cowboy who understood, to a woman who learned to believe in herself, to all the people who came after and needed to hear the same truth. That our struggles do not define us but refine us, that our pain has purpose. That our tears are not the end of the story but proof that we are still writing it. Hannah and Nathan's story was complete, their lives fully lived, their love immortalized not just in memory but in the ongoing life of the family and the land they had claimed. They had fought their battles, faced their demons, and won the only victory that truly mattered. A life of love, meaning, and connection. And in the end, that was everything.